The bell above the bakery door chimed, a soft, trembling note that sliced through the hum of early morning. An old man, his coat threadbare and his steps unsteady, shuffled inside, clutching a photograph so worn its edges curled like autumn leaves. His eyes, clouded with age, held a fire that made the air feel heavier, as if the world paused to listen. The bakery was a haven of warmth, its shelves lined with golden loaves and pastries dusted with sugar, their sweetness curling through the air. Behind the counter, Clara, the baker, kneaded dough with hands that knew the rhythm of flour and water like a second heartbeat. She was 32, with flour smudged on her cheek and a smile that welcomed every stranger. But when she looked up and saw the old man, her hands froze, the dough forgotten. His face was a map of wrinkles, each line a story she didn't yet know, but his presence tugged at something deep inside her, like a memory she hadn't lived. He approached the counter, his movements deliberate, as if every step cost him something precious. "Good morning," he said, his voice gravelly but kind, like stones smoothed by a river. He placed the photograph on the counter, his fingers lingering on its surface as if letting go might unravel him. The image showed a young woman, her hair tied back, laughing in a kitchen with flour on her apron and light in her eyes. Clara's breath caught. She knew that face not from life, but from dreams, from stories her mother used to tell before she passed. "Do you know her?" the old man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara's heart stuttered. She wanted to say no, to shake her head and return to the safety of her dough, but the photograph held her captive. The woman's smile was her mother's, but younger, brighter, untouched by the illness that had stolen her too soon. Clara's eyes stung, and she pressed her lips together, fighting the tide of emotion rising in her chest. "I think she might be my mother," Clara said, her voice cracking. The old man's gaze softened, but there was a weight to it, a sorrow that seemed to carry decades. "Her name was Eleanor," he said. "She worked here long ago. This was her place, her heart." He gestured vaguely at the bakery, his eyes drifting to the shelves as if seeing a different time, a different world. Clara's mind spun. Her mother had never spoken of working in a bakery, only of recipes scribbled in notebooks and dreams of feeding people with love. But this shop, with its creaking floors and warm ovens, had been Clara's inheritance, passed down from her mother's family. She'd always thought it was just a business, a legacy of practicality. Now, this stranger's words cracked that assumption open, spilling questions she wasn't ready to answer. "Why are you here?" Clara asked, her voice sharper than she intended. The old man's hands trembled as he picked up the photograph, his thumb brushing over the woman's face. "I made a promise," he said. "A long time ago, I promised Eleanor I'd find her daughter. I've been looking for years, through cities and towns, following whispers of her name. This picture, it's all I had left of her." Clara's knees weakened, and she gripped the counter for support. Her mother had died when she was 16, leaving behind fragments of a life Clara had pieced together through stories and faded recipes. But this man, this stranger, knew her mother in a way Clara never had. The thought was both a gift and a wound. "How did you know her?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The old man's eyes glistened, and he looked away, as if the answer was too heavy to hold. "We were young once," he said. "We worked here together, in this very shop. She was the light of this place, always laughing, always giving. I loved her, but I was too afraid to say it. Then life pulled us apart, and I never saw her again until it was too late." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to ask more, to demand every detail of this man's connection to her mother, but the weight of his words pressed against her chest. She glanced at the photograph again, her mother's smile a beacon in the storm of her thoughts. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why did you wait so long?" The old man's shoulders sagged. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I ran from my promises, from my mistakes. But when I heard this bakery was still here, still hers in some way, I had to come. I had to find you." He paused, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry it took me so long." The bell chimed again, and a young boy, no older than 10, burst into the shop, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "Grandpa," he called, tugging at the old man's sleeve. "You said we'd get cookies." The boy's energy was a jolt, a sudden shift in the room's heavy air. Clara blinked, noticing the resemblance, the same sharp jaw, the same bright eyes. This boy was the old man's grandson, a piece of his life, she hadn't expected. "This is Tommy," the old man said, ruffling the boy's hair. "He's the reason I kept searching. I wanted him to know about Eleanor, about the kind of person she was." Tommy grinned, oblivious to the weight of the moment, and pointed at a tray of chocolate chip cookies. Clara forced a smile, her heart still reeling, and handed the boy a cookie. His joy was a small light in the storm of her emotions, but it wasn't enough to quiet the questions swirling in her mind. As Tommy munched happily, Clara looked back at the old man. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice raw. He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the photograph. "I want you to know her," he said finally. "Not just as your mother, but as the woman who made this place a home. And I want to make things right, if I can." Clara's chest ached with the weight of his words. She didn't know if she could trust this man, this stranger who carried her mother's memory like a sacred relic. But as she looked at the photograph, at her mother's laughter frozen in time, she felt a spark of something new, hope, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. The bakery, with its warm light and familiar scents, seemed to hum with secrets she was only beginning to uncover. The morning rush swept into the bakery like a tide, pulling Clara back to the rhythm of orders and clinking coins. But the old man's words lingered, heavy as the scent of rising dough, anchoring her thoughts to the photograph still lying on the counter. She stole glances at it between serving customers, her mother's smile a quiet accusation that stirred both love and loss. The old man, who introduced himself as Henry, stayed through the morning, sitting at a corner table with Tommy. The boy chattered about school and superheroes, his voice a bright thread weaving through the hum of the shop. Henry watched him with a tenderness that made Clara's chest ache, but his eyes kept drifting to her, as if waiting for something she wasn't ready to give. She didn't know how to bridge the gap between them, this man who claimed to know her mother, who carried a piece of her past she'd never touched. As the crowd thinned, Clara wiped her hands on her apron and approached their table. "You said you worked here with her," she said, her voice low to keep Tommy from hearing. "What was she like back then?" Henry's face softened, his eyes distant. Eleanor was alive in a way most people aren't. She'd sing while she baked, off-key but fearless. She'd give bread to anyone who looked hungry, even if they couldn't pay. This place was her heart, and she made it everyone's. Clara's throat tightened. She'd heard stories of her mother's kindness, but they were always filtered through her own childhood memories, fuzzy, incomplete. Henry's words painted a picture so vivid it hurt, like seeing her mother for the first time. "She never told me about this place," Clara admitted. "Not like that. I thought it was just a family business." Henry's gaze dropped to his hands, folded tightly on the table. "She left the bakery when she married," he said. "Your father, he wanted a different life for her, something bigger. She loved him, so she followed. But I think she left a piece of herself here." His voice cracked, and Clara saw the weight of years in his hunched shoulders, the regret etched into his face. The bell chimed, and a woman entered, her presence abrupt against the quiet moment. She was in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a scarf knotted tightly around her neck. "Henry," she said, her voice clipped but familiar, like she'd stepped out of another chapter of his life. Henry stiffened, his face paling. "Margaret," he said, almost a whisper. Clara's stomach twisted. This was the twist she hadn't seen coming, a new face, a new piece of the puzzle. Margaret's gaze flicked to Clara, then to the photograph on the counter, and her expression softened, but only slightly. "I heard you were here," she said to Henry. "I didn't believe it. Not after all these years." "Who are you?" Clara asked, her voice sharper than she meant. Margaret's eyes met hers, and there was something in them, grief, maybe, or recognition. "I worked here too," she said, "with Eleanor and Henry. I was her best friend until I wasn't." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Clara's mind raced. Her mother had never mentioned to Margaret, but the way this woman looked at the photograph, with a mix of love and pain, told Clara there was more to the story. "What happened?" Clara asked, her voice barely steady. Margaret hesitated, glancing at Henry, who looked like he wanted to disappear. "We were young," she said finally. "Eleanor and I dreamed of running this bakery together, of building something that lasted. But Henry, he changed things. He loved her, and I couldn't stand it. I left, and I never came back. Not until now." Clara's heart pounded. The bakery, her mother's sanctuary, was unraveling into a tapestry of secrets, love, betrayal, dreams abandoned. She looked at Henry, expecting him to deny it, but he only nodded, his face a mask of shame. I didn't mean to come between them, he said. But I was selfish. I wanted Eleanor to myself, and I pushed Margaret away. It's one of the things I've regretted most. Tommy, who had been quietly coloring at the table, looked up, sensing the tension. Grandpa, are you okay? He asked, his voice small. Henry forced a smile, ruffling the boy's hair. I'm fine, Tommy. Just talking about old friends. But Clara saw the truth in his eyes, the weight of choices that had shaped not just his life, but her mother's, and now hers. Margaret stepped closer to the counter, her fingers brushing the photograph. Eleanor was the best of us, she said softly. She forgave me, you know. Years later, she wrote me a letter, said she missed me. I never answered. I was too proud. Her voice broke, and Clara felt a pang of empathy, unexpected and sharp. This woman, like Henry, carried her mother's memory as both a treasure and a burden. Clara's hands trembled as she picked up the photograph. Why are you both here now? She asked, her voice raw. Margaret and Henry exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Because of you, Margaret said. Eleanor's daughter. This bakery is her legacy, and we both owed her something. Henry wanted to find you. I wanted to make peace. The weight of their words settled over Clara like a heavy blanket. She looked around the bakery, at the shelves her mother had once filled, at the ovens that had warmed her dreams. It wasn't just a business, it was a place where lives had intertwined, where love and loss had left their marks. Clara didn't know if she was ready to carry that legacy, but for the first time, she felt its pull, its power. The afternoon light slanted through the bakery's windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Clara moved through her tasks mechanically, her hands shaping dough while her mind churned with Henry and Margaret's revelations. The photograph of her mother, now tucked safely behind the counter, felt like a living thing, whispering questions she couldn't yet answer. Henry and Tommy stayed, the boys' laughter a soft counterpoint to the tension that lingered between the adults. Margaret, however, had left after their conversation, promising to return. Her departure left Clara unsettled, as if a door had been opened but not fully crossed. She wanted to know more about her mother, about the choices that had shaped this bakery, about the people who had loved her and lost her. As the day wore on, Clara found herself watching Henry. He was quiet now, his eyes fixed on Tommy as the boy drew pictures of spaceships on a napkin. There was a gentleness in Henry's gaze, but also a weariness, as if he carried a lifetime of apologies. Clara wanted to be angry with him for his silence, for his absence, but the photograph and his story made it hard to see him as anything but human. Do you have any more pictures? Clara asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Henry looked up, surprised, then nodded. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound album, its pages yellowed with age. These were hers, he said, handing it to Clara. She gave it to me before she left the bakery. Said it was for safekeeping. Clara's fingers trembled as she opened the album. The first page showed her mother, younger still, standing outside the bakery with a basket of bread, her smile wide and unguarded. Another photo captured her laughing with Margaret, their arms linked, flour dusting their hair. Each image was a window into a life Clara had never known, a life where her mother was more than a memory. She was vibrant, alive, whole. She was so happy here, Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Henry nodded, his eyes glistening. She was. This place was her dream. She used to say she wanted to fill the world with bread and kindness. His voice faltered, and he looked down at his hands. I should have stayed with her. I should have fought for her. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him it wasn't his fault, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned the page and froze. There, in a faded photograph, was a man who looked like her father, standing next to her mother. But it wasn't her father, it was Henry, younger, with a shy smile and eyes full of adoration. The realization hit her like a wave. Henry hadn't just loved her mother. He'd been her first love, the one before her father. You were with her, Clara said, her voice barely audible. Henry nodded, his face etched with pain. We were young, foolish. I thought I had time to tell her everything, to make things right. But then she met your father, and I let her go. I thought it was what she wanted. Clara's mind reeled. Her father had always spoken of her mother with love, but he'd never mentioned Henry, never hinted at this other life. The bakery, the photographs. Henry's regret it was all a story her mother had left behind, a story Clara was only now beginning to understand. She wanted to be angry, to demand why no one had told her, but the weight of Henry's grief stopped her. He wasn't here to hurt her, was here to heal something, even if it was too late. The bell chimed again, and a new figure stepped into the shop, a man in his 50s, with graying hair and a hesitant smile. "Clara," he said, his voice uncertain. She blinked, recognizing him vaguely from her childhood. "Uncle Paul," she said, her voice rising with surprise. Paul was her mother's cousin, a distant figure who'd sent cards at Christmas but never visited. His presence now, in the middle of this unfolding drama, felt like another twist, another thread in the tapestry. "I heard about the old man," Paul said, glancing at Henry. "I didn't know if it was true, but I had to come." He pulled a letter from his pocket, its envelope worn but unopened. "Eleanor wrote this before she died. She asked me to give it to you when the time was right. I think that's now." Clara's hands shook as she took the letter. Her mother's handwriting curled across the envelope, elegant and familiar, a piece of her that felt alive. She didn't open it, not yet. The weight of the moment, with Henry, Tommy, and now Paul, was too much. She needed time, space to breathe, to process the flood of her mother's past crashing into her present. "What does it say?" she asked Paul, her voice trembling. He shook his head. "I never read it. She said it was for you, for when you were ready to know her fully." His eyes softened, and he glanced at Henry. "She talked about you, you know. Not often, but enough. She never forgot this place, or the people in it." Clara looked at Henry, then at the letter, then at the bakery around her. It was more than a shop, it was a vessel for her mother's dreams, her love, her mistakes. And now, it was Clara's to carry forward, whether she was ready or not. The bakery was quiet now, the last customers gone, the ovens cooling with a faint hum. Clara sat at the corner table, the letter from her mother in her hands, its weight heavier than any dough she'd ever needed. Henry, Tommy, and Paul sat nearby, their presence a strange comfort, like pieces of a puzzle she was still assembling. She opened the letter, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the single sheet of paper. Her mother's words flowed across the page, each letter a thread tying Clara to a past she'd never fully known. "My dearest Clara," it began, "if you're reading this, you found the heart of the bakery, the place where I was most myself. I hope you forgive me for what I didn't tell you. I wanted you to have your own story, not mine." Clara's eyes blurred with tears as she read. Her mother wrote of the bakery, of the joy she found in baking, of the love she shared with Henry and the friendship she lost with Margaret. She wrote of choosing Clara's father, of leaving the bakery to build a family, but never forgetting the warmth of those ovens, the laughter that filled those walls. "I left a piece of my heart there," she wrote, "and I hope you find it, Clara. I hope you make it your own." The letter ended with a request: find Henry. Find Margaret. They were my family, too, in a different way. Let them tell you who I was, so you can know who you are. Clara's breath hitched, and she looked up at Henry, whose eyes were fixed on the table, as if he could feel the weight of her mother's words. Paul reached over, squeezing her hand gently, and even Tommy, sensing the moment, stayed quiet, his crayon still. "I don't know what to do with this," Clara admitted, her voice raw. "All these years, I thought I knew her. But this, it's like meeting her for the first time." Henry's gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw not just regret, but hope. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Just keep this place alive." That's what she would have wanted. Paul nodded. "She loved you, Clara, more than anything. This bakery, these stories, they're her gift to you." His voice was steady, but his eyes were wet, and Clara realized he, too, had been carrying her mother's memory, waiting for the right moment to share it. The bell chimed, and Margaret returned, her scarf looser now, her face softer. She carried a small box, its edges worn like the photograph. "I found this in my attic," she said, placing it on the table. "Eleanor's recipes. The ones we wrote together, before everything changed." Clara opened the box, revealing pages of handwritten notes, recipes for bread, pastries, cakes, each one annotated with her mother's laughter, her dreams. The sight broke something open in Clara. She cried, not just for the mother she'd lost, but for the woman she was discovering, the woman who had loved so fiercely, who had built something beautiful despite her mistakes. Henry reached out, his hand hovering over hers, then resting gently. "She'd be proud of you," he said, his voice thick. "This place, it's still hers, because of you." Clara looked around the bakery, at the shelves her mother had filled, at the people who carried her memory. She thought of Tommy, whose bright eyes reminded her of her mother's joy, and of Margaret, who had come back to make peace. She thought of Paul, who had held on to her mother's words until the time was right. And she thought of Henry, who had spent a lifetime searching for redemption. "I want to keep her alive," Clara said, her voice steady now. "Not just the bakery, but her. Her kindness, her dreams. I want to do that." The words felt like a vow, a promise to the mother she was only beginning to know, and to herself. As the sun set, casting a golden glow through the windows, Clara felt the bakery come alive in a new way. It wasn't just a place of bread and sugar, it was a home for stories, for forgiveness, for love that endured beyond time. She didn't have all the answers, but she had a start, a foundation to build on. And for the first time, she felt ready to carry her mother's legacy, not as a burden, but as a gift.